Okay, so we got 2002 Chevy S10 with a 4.3 liter motor. We're gonna go over a couple things, what to do when we change the distributor. This one here on the end of the distributor, it does have a helical gear. So where this slides in and meshes into the camshaft, the gear to gear matters. It has to be properly indexed. Afterwards, you got this hold down bracket, and the whole distributor can be rotated back and forth for the ignition timing. But more importantly is the indexing. So a couple things you need to pay attention to when you are changing these. You want to make a couple marks. Now, of course, these are, let me grab a light. Over at a friend's shop right now. Guy likes working on Toyotas. Hybrids. Weird. So these guys here are harder to see, harder to mark, but ideally you want to make a mark on the engine where the distributor was. So if we look back on the old distributor, you find a feature, say like this one right here, where it lines up on both of them. You kind of make a mark there so you kind of know where the rotation of the whole distributor is. It's always good to mark that. That's not the biggest thing to pay attention to. The most important thing is indexing it properly. If you index it properly, but you got the rotation out a little bit, it's a lot easier just to adjust the timing than it is to adjust the indexing. You know, one of the proper ways is you can hook up a timing light and you can do all that, or basically usually what most people do is you just loosen off the bolt so you can rotate it and just rotate it back and forth and listen to the engine. You're basically going for whatever sounds like the engine's running the best, you know, the highest RPM. You could hook up a vacuum gauge, look for the highest vacuum reading, all that sort of things. But you would just rotate the distributor until you have basically the best running idle. So when you're changing the distributor, it's good to mark that. But the most important thing to pay attention to is the indexing. So what we'll do, I'm gonna pull off the cap so we can see the rotor, and then we'll make a mark where the rotor is pointing to. So let me quickly pull off that cap. Okay, so we got the cap off so we can see the rotor. So a couple other things we want to mark. We want to pay attention to where that rotor is pointing, because when we put the new distributor in, we want that rotor pointing in the same spot. These ones here, since they are, let's go back to the old guy. Oh, I'm knocking stuff off. Okay, so if we pay attention to our old distributor, you can see the gears. You could put that into any of those spots, and if you put it into a different spot, a different gear mesh, then the rotor would turn. So we want to pay attention to where the rotor is facing, so when we put the new one in, that the new rotor is facing the same spot, then we know we're good. On these ones here, since the gears are helical, we also want to pay attention to something else. This isn't going to pull up straight, or sorry, let me reword that. When this pulls up, it's going to rotate a little bit as it unmeshes, and that's going to move the rotor. So not only do we want to pay attention to where the rotor is facing, but as we pull it up, we want to pay attention to where the rotor, the final position is, where it rotates to, so that when we put the new distributor in, if we line up the rotor initially to where the old one came out, then as we push the new one down, it'll wind down to point to the same spot. Worst case scenario, if you don't get that right, if all you do is pay attention to where the rotor is pointing to, then at least you can work around that. You can, you know, you might have to pull it out a few times and kind of keep trying it until you find just the right gear mesh to have that rotor facing the exact same spot. However, what do you do when somebody puts it in, they're not used to it and it's not indexed properly? Well, if you look up the procedure, kind of what you do is you have to find number 1 TDC. So that's all kinds of issues. You would need to find a way to turn the crankshaft. You need to find number 1 TDC. So if you pull out a spark plug and say you put a compression tester down there, it's one of the easy ways to do it. And you can put a compression gauge on there, and just rotate the engine over by hand. Try to do it pretty smoothly. Try to do it not super slow, and watch for the compression gauge to start building a little bit of compression. So if you remember the 4 strokes of the engine, if you're rotating the engine over, what if you happen to have, when you start looking for number 1 TDC, what if you're on the power stroke? So on the power stroke, all the valves will be closed, the piston will start going down. So if your gauge has a vacuum reading, if it doesn't have a needle stop and if it can actually show vacuum, then you'll start seeing a tiny bit of vacuum. Keep in mind, you're rotating it so slowly that you're not really going to build much vacuum. But if you start rotating, you see a tiny bit of vacuum, then you know you're on the power stroke, so you got a ways to go. If you start rotating it and you don't see any vacuum at all, then, well, you could be on exhaust or you could be on intake. Keep in mind, the piston rings don't seal 100%, and we're turning it so slowly that, you know, when you're on exhaust, obviously you're not going to have any compression because the exhaust valves are open. And when you're on intake and the piston's going down, you're also not going to have any compression or even any vacuum, because the you know, sure, the throttle plate will be closed, but with how slowly you're turning it, there will be enough air in that intake manifold and enough air that can get past the piston rings that you're not really going to see any vacuum. So then you just keep rotating it, and then as soon as the piston starts coming up on compression, the valves will close, then you'll see a little bit of pressure. So what you can do at that point, conversely, if you don't want to hook up the gauge, what some people do is they'll just take out the Schrader valve and they'll just put their thumb, you just put your thumb over the hose, and you can feel the pressure build up. Either way you do it, whether you want to put your thumb over it or you just want to use the gauge, as soon as you start feeling pressure, then you'd want to take the, if we go back down there, let me go into the flashlight mode. I don't know if you can see that. I got my hose in there. But as soon as you start seeing pressure build, what you'd want to do is put something like a screwdriver in there, or a 1/4-inch extension, and you rotate the engine until that is at the furthest out. Or if you got a boroscope, you can put that in there and kind of watch the piston, kind of catch it at the topmost. It's ugly to do, it's a pain in the butt, super time consuming. A lot of times number 1's not too easy to get to. If you do have another cylinder, say, that's easier to get to, you could use another cylinder. You would just have to pay attention to whichever cylinder you're trying to rotate to the rotor to on your distributor cap. But anyways, so say you find, for this case we'll talk about number 1 TDC. Say you find number 1 TDC, the piston's at the top, we're on compression, then you wouldn't move the engine. You would just know that for that distributor to be in properly, that rotor would have to point to the number 1. Come on, let me just get this out if we can. Oh, everything's all jammed up. So you'd find the number 1 spot right here on their cap. So as long as the rotor is pointing to that position, so if we flip that over, so if we look right here, so this tube on this particular one, on this Chevy S10, this tube here, that's the number 1 spark. So if you follow that over, that would be this contact here. Right. So yeah, if we follow that over, the rotor would be needing to be facing this contact for it to be at number 1. So if you get everything positioned, then you just remove the distributor, replace it until the rotor's pointing to here, and then you can adjust your timing afterwards. All that's a bit of work. It's a bit time consuming, it's a bit picky and all that. Since I have a picoscope with a laptop, I have the pressure transducer just down here, the Pico WPS X500, and then I also have a pickup around the number 1, which is right here, so I can make another trace for when the number 1 is sparking. Using this method, I could do it off of any cylinder. It doesn't matter which. I would just have to have my secondary pickup on the wire that I have the picoscope into. You looking for Amandeep?
Yes.
He's just stepped out, grab a couple coffees. Yeah. Probably back into 5. Yeah.
I will.
Okay.
You troubleshooter or you troublemaker?
Both. Both. You betcha. Yeah, I show him and Deep all the fancy tools, and then he feels compelled to buy them, and he says I'm expensive. Yeah, but what can he do? Oh, I don't have very much time. Okay, so where were we? So I have the pressure transducer in number 1 cylinder. I have my secondary ignition pickup around the number 1 wire. To get a better signal, you want it closest to the cap as possible. On these systems with distributors, keep in mind that there is a jump. There is a gap from the rotor to these pegs. So if you're looking for a secondary pattern, your pattern's not going to be as good because some of that information is going to be disturbed by that jump. However, we don't care about the pattern, we just care about seeing something as a sync. So just the big firing line is all we need. So we got the pressure transducer, we got our secondary pickup. We definitely need somewhere for that spark to go. So this tucked away to the side, make sure everything's grounded, and we'll run the scope. The other thing we want to do too, you don't want it to be spraying any fuel, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be kind of randomly moving the distributor and seeing where it lines up. I don't want it to detonate. I could potentially position that distributor in a spot where it fires right as the piston's coming up during compression, and you know there's already fuel in there, and then bad things happen. So disable fuel, whether you unplug the injectors, you pull out a fuse, you pull out the relay, you pull out the fuel pump fuse relay. Just keep in mind, if you pull out a fuel pump fuse or relay, allow time for that residual pressure to drop. You know, crank it a few times before you do any of this. So anyways, I did knock off this guy. We definitely want that guy hooked up to the ground. So if we go over, see if I can do this in a spot that doesn't have that much glare. Okay, so this is kind of what's happening. We can see on the pressure transducer, we can see the pressure spikes. So those are number 1 TDC, reasonably close at least. These red lines, that's your secondary pickup. It's not a great signal because we're well away from the coil, but you know what? We can definitely see when it's sparking. And we can see that it's, you know, 360 out from when it should be. 180 on the cam, 360 on the crank. So this line here should be right in line with one of these pressure pulses, and it's not. So doing this method with a scope, yes, it costs a whole bunch of money. You have to have all this stuff, but if you have all this stuff and you're familiar with it, you can do it much easier. You don't have to pay attention to where TDC is. You don't have to pay attention to where the rotor is facing or any of that sort of stuff. You just kind of guess and test and see where it moves to. So we know that looking at this, we need that rotor to be facing basically the opposite of where it's facing. So if we go back over here, let's see if I can get this up and out. Oh, and oh, I keep knocking stuff off. Alright, so I think you can see that. So the rotor needs to be facing roughly, kind of right now with the way things are positioned, it needs to be roughly facing where the connector is, just on the front of the vehicle side of that connector. So I'm just going to move it to there. Going to undo the bolt, lift it up, rotate it to there, kind of mesh it up so it's roughly around there. Then I'm going to put the cap back on and I'm going to fire it back up and see where it's at. And I'm just going to keep repositioning that until I can get those two lines to line up. So let me, unfortunately I don't think I'll be able to show you taking the hold down out and moving it. I'll see if I can get you a shot of something, just because it's going to be so tight in there. But I'm going to take out the bolt. Basically I'm just going to lift it up so that the gears are free, and then I'm just going to rotate wherever that. So if we move this to kind of, it's like, I don't know, something like there. I think this is about how it is in the vehicle right now. So I'm just going to lift it up. I'm going to rotate the rotor until, and as I'm rotating the rotor, the gears down at the bottom are moving. So it's about there. But keep in mind, see how these rotors are, or these gears are positioned, right? If I put it right there, and if I push it down, as these gears line up, you see they're going to be pushed. So as it pushes down, it's going to go like that. So I'll probably actually line it up somewhere around there because I want the final position to be there. So let me unbolt it, I'll lift it up, and I'll show you what it looks like when I lift it up. Okay, so can we see down there? You can see the hold down bracket. I got the bolt out. That's right up there. So I want, there's the connector. The connector is roughly 180 out, so that's roughly where I want it to be. So if I can prop up this light, I don't know if that's totally needed. So I'm just gonna lift this straight up. Careful not to get any dirt in there. And you'll see as I'm lifting it up, you'll see it kind of rotating back. Yeah, so I don't know if you saw that. So it moved, I don't know, whatever that is, 20 degrees or so. Can I rotate it now? No, it's caught on something. There we go. I think I can rotate it now. No. There we go. I should be able to rotate that. There we go. Okay, so move that 20 degrees or so. So if you were putting yours in, if you were swapping it over, you'd want to mark it to see where the final position is. That's really important. But if you mark where the position ended up as, like right now, and you put the new one in, you line up the rotor so it's in that position to begin with, then, so if we were to push this back down, you see how it ends up in that position. So if you mark those two spots, then you'll be good. But if you don't mark those spots like this, then you just have to go through all this. And if you don't mark the spots, you rotate the engine over, then you have to go through all this work. But let me rotate this over. Come on. So we want it past the 20 or so degrees past the connector. So probably if we just put it right about there, maybe. and then we'll just kind of wiggle that so it finds a spot. Okay, so how's that look? I don't think that's far enough. So you can see this is the rotation of the distributor. This is our timing ability. So if we have it right there, okay, we're kind of close, but I don't know which way this rotates with the engine. So we'll try it there, but I might need to still move, because I'm kind of at the end of my adjustment. So I might need to move this one notch over. I might need this to be like kind of directly in line with that connector. But let's put that bolt down, if I can find where that hole is. Oh, I think, there we go. Bracket pulled out a little bit. Okay. And then see if we can't kind of, yeah, that's got to go more. That'll have to be go more. Yeah. That was there. Well, you know what? Let's try it. Let's just try it. Let's see what happens. So put the bolt back in. So let me just put the bolt back in. I'll tighten it up. I'll put the cap back on. I'll put the wires back on, and then I'll rerun it, take another capture, and see where we're at. Okay, so I got it moved over. Bolt is tight. It's down there, if you can see that. Down there, I don't know if you can. Either way, bolt is in there. It's tight. Doesn't have to be stupid tight, just needs to be holding it down. I got the screws in. Again, those don't go very tight. They just kind of hold it down. I don't want that cap jumping off. I got the wires back on. Make sure to put them back on the right order. Go back to all my test equipment, make sure I didn't unplug everything, make sure my ground clips are on. I keep knocking this one off. Should probably almost go to a better spot. Oh yeah, so if we go back over here, so this is how it was before. So I moved that, so these lines should be closer to the peaks here. So I'm just gonna run it and check it. And ideally we want these lines to be really close, just a touch before. So let me crank it over and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so I got the screen recording. We'll quickly go over here, crank it just a few revolutions, just enough to get it. Oh, why did he leave the key on? Okay. Okay, that's all we need. Alrighty, perfect. We will stop that. Let's take a look to see what it looks like. Well, I think we are, so you can ignore the small lines because you kind of you can see some background feedback noise from the other cylinders firing, especially since that my inductive pickup is so close to the others. You know, it'll pick up some of that noise, but we can see we're much better. If we scroll down, right there. So what we can do actually is let us go, because we don't care about what the actual what the pressure pulse patterns look like. We just care about the peaks. Okay, so we see we're after. So you know what, if we wanted to, that's one of the cool things about Pico we could put up our cursors, we could see exactly where that is. So this would start right now. I don't know if you heard it kind of cough and sputter that a little bit. There's just a tiny bit of residual fuel in there. But we would want that just a touch on that side. Yeah, we're right about at top dead center. So right now, actually, yeah, we're bang on there. Let me save this because I don't have my laptop hooked up to power, so it goes into suspend mode and that after adjust, we'll just go 0 TDC save. Okay. So the other one, if this were off a little bit more, so if we were to zoom in, we could put a cursor. So yeah, this is just a touch after. So, you know, if we wanted to, we could go, say, move that to there. And yeah, so if you look right there, we are 1.5 degrees after TDC. We want it to be before there. So let's see if we can rotate the distributor and make up that. Because I think if I move it to one more tooth, I think it'll move it a lot more in 1 degree. So the beauty of doing this method is, let's say if that were out more than that, let's say if we're 20 degrees out, because you could count the number of teeth. Well, we could do that right now. So this will go into the camshaft. So a camshaft, these pulses right here are measuring crankshaft. So a camshaft, one rotation of the camshaft is 2 rotations of the crankshaft. So one rotation of this will be 720 degrees. So if we were to count the number of teeth that are there, I don't know, let's say there's 16. I don't know how many exactly are there. I don't really feel like counting them. But what we could do is we could go 720 divided by 16 and say 45 degrees, right? What the heck? Let's actually try and count them. So we'll start right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or so 13. Sorry? Oh, he should be back any second. He just went to Tim Hortons, so I don't know how long that takes. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, I lost track. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we got 13 teeth. So if we go 720 divided by 13, so each tooth is 55 degrees. So we're on the proper tooth. Now we just need to adjust the timing a little bit. If this were out, 60 degrees, say, if this line were over, say, over here or over there, we could do this. We could measure how many degrees is out, and say if it were out 110 degrees, then we would know 110 degrees of crankshaft, that we would know by our calculation that we'd need to move 2 teeth over. Could give us an idea, but we are basically right there. Okay, so let's zoom out of here and make sure we're bringing these back up a little bit. You probably can't see much right now, but that's okay. So I'll just start it, and it should start right now, and then all we'll have to do is the timing adjustment afterwards. But we got it hooked up, so we might as well get a capture. We can see what the timing's like while it's running. Okay. I do have the one spark plug out because I got my tester in there. So yeah, it's definitely not running very good because it's got a dead misfire. Okay, so we'll go over here, stop that. Now let's see what you look like. Alrighty. So it did adjust the timing electronically, because if I remember correctly, I don't really deal with distributors much anymore. I don't like working on them. Let me save this file, save as. Okay, I'll fill out all those fields later. Hopefully I will. Dash running. Okay, so if we pull our cursors back over there, not that one, put the 720 somewhere on there. Can you guys still see? Still lots of glare. Well, let me just set this up and I'll move you afterwards. Yeah, it's not perfect there. My buddy was going to get me coffee, but I think he got lost. What is going on? So we're about there, and that shows 25 degrees before top dead center. Let me zoom in on that and see how close we are. Yeah. So we got 25 degrees before top dead center. That is depending on its because we don't, so normally when you would do this on older vehicles, you would kind of do a mode to disable electronic spark ignition, and so you might set it to 10 degrees or 0 degrees, whatever it calls for. But this has the electronic spark advance enabled, so that might even be good. As of right now, I have to actually get back to my normal shop. So it's running. I'll tell them to put the spark plug back in. I'll take all my crap away, and then if we need to do a tweak on the timing, I can come back and do that later. But as of right now, you heard it, it's running. If you have the equipment, this is what you can do. Otherwise, you're kind of going around the manual way. Okay, so not surprising, turns out there's more to the story. Initially I was tasked to go down there and properly index the distributor. He told me that he was chasing a misfire, went that route, put a distributor in there, and that won't start. So seemed pretty simple to me. Gave me an opportunity to kind of test out the idea that I had with using the pressure, the in-cylinder pressure cylinder. Try that again. The picoscope in-cylinder pressure transducer. Then I can see the big spike of the compression, and I can match that up with secondary ignition. I thought that would be kind of neat, be much easier than doing it the manual way of finding TDC, which, you know, in some of these vehicles, especially 4.3s, you don't have the best view of things, and it's just kind of messy. So when I finished, I didn't have much time. I was just doing it before work, and sure enough, I was late for my work anyways. When I finished and it did start when it's cranking. I kind of hear it had a funny cadence to it. It sort of sounded like it had low compression on one of these cylinders. But you know what? I don't know how this truck ran before. It's a 4.3, so I don't know if it has a spider problem. It could be dumping fuel in the cylinder. There's all kinds of things. Not really concerned at the time. I'm just there to index the distributor, just there to get it running. That's literally all I had time for. So, you know, I didn't even have time to put the spark plug back in and run it on all the plugs and kind of see how it felt, because, you know, I had to run to work. I was already late. So, my buddy called me back a little while later saying that, yeah, it's still running crappy. So, you know what? Hey, no problem. It's drivable at least now. It starts and runs. So, drive it down to my shop. I'll take a look at that. It's coming up to a long weekend, so I had all the time to do that. You know, leading into it, kind of was assuming it was a spider, just because 4.3 and all. But I went through it. I found out it wasn't the spider. Found out it was something else. So there is a part 2. So if you're hanging around for this, I'll put up a link to part 2. Check that out. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.